Hello and welcome back. I don't think I've really ever talked about the fact that when I was a child and a teenager, I was really big into reading, and then kind of from the point when I went to university, so for the last 10 years, I haven't really read as much, but this year I've really got back into reading. It's currently mid-November and I've read either 41 or 42 books this year. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about all the books that I've read this year and which ones were good and which ones I would not recommend. I've got 5 things to really quickly say before we actually get into the reviews. So firstly is that I'm going to be really brief about this because I've got over 40 books. If I spent a minute per book, that's over 40 minutes for this video, so I am going to be brief. Number 2, I'm mostly going to cover them in chronological order from when I read them. Number 3, I only really started picking up reading again from May onwards. I did listen to a few audiobooks earlier in the year, but the majority of these have been read in the last 6 months. Number 4, I read physical books, but I also listen to audiobooks, so there's a mix of both, and I will tell you which were physical and which were audiobooks. I don't read ebooks, so I don't have like a Kindle or read on a screen, I only read physical books. And then finally, just on that note, I generally get my physical books from charity shops, Amazon, The Works, that sort of thing. My audiobooks come largely from the library, actually. So if you didn't know, there's this thing called BorrowBox, at least in the UK, where you can borrow audiobooks from the library. So that's where the majority of mine come from. But I do also have an Audible subscription. I get 1 credit per month. Right, let's go. So the first book that I listened to this year was When the Curtain Falls by Carrie Hope Fletcher. I gave it 4 stars, so I obviously enjoyed it. I seem to remember it was about theatre and ghostiness and stuff. I really enjoy Carrie's magical realism, so I really enjoyed that element of the book. After that, I bought Tom Felton's autobiography, which is called Beyond the Wand, and I listened to that while we were in Gran Canaria, so that was kind of February time. I loved it. As a massive Harry Potter fan, it was fascinating, but it was also really interesting to hear more about Tom's life, kind of pre-Harry Potter and also post, and I gave that 5 stars. And a bonus there, Tom actually reads the audiobook. Next up was Eve of Man by Tom and Giovanna Fletcher. This is the first book in the series and it felt a bit Hunger Gamesy to me, so I really loved it at the start, but then the end of it felt like the third Hunger Games, or like the second half of the third Hunger Games, where it all just becomes war, and I'm not necessarily that interested in that part of it, and I was exactly the same with the third Hunger Games. So I really loved the start, but I felt like I didn't enjoy the end as much. So I ended up giving it 4 stars to kind of balance that out. And also I have not read the second book because I feel like it's going to be more war stuff and I'm just not interested in that. So I suppose let that tell you what it needs to tell you. I remember listening to Eve of Man and I think I finished it on the train to London when we were going to Florida. And so the next book is actually the first physical book that I read this year. And the reason that I got back into reading is because I bought this book to take to Florida with me and I just loved it. And so I obviously continued reading it when I got home. It's The Keeper of Stories by Sally Page, and it's about this lady who becomes a cleaner for this kind of older woman who seems really difficult, and the idea is that the cleaner kind of collects stories from the people that she cleans for, and I just loved it. I thought it was brilliant, and I gave The Keeper of Stories 5 stars. While we were in Florida, my Audible credit renewed at the start of May, and so I bought How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, and that was fantastic. It was so gripping. I absolutely loved it. I gave that one 5 stars. At this point, I kind of decided that I was going to start trying to reread some of the books that I already have. So next up was On the Other Side by Carrie Hope Fletcher. So that's my second Carrie Fletcher book of this year. Again, I remember loving the magical realism in it from the first time that I read it, and I did really enjoy reading it again. I gave it 4 stars. Next up was an audiobook, and this is The Secret Barrister, Stories of the Law and How It's Broken. I really enjoyed this book and I gave it 4 stars. It was very interesting. Later in the year, I borrowed another audiobook by The Secret Barrister, which was called Fake Law, The Truth About Justice in an Age of Lies, and I gave that one 5 stars. I think it's because it takes some of the kind of really divisive headlines about things and then talks about the law behind it and why the headlines aren't always true. Next, I read the physical book for The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. That was another fantastic book, really gripping, really brilliant concept for a book, I think, and I gave that one 5 stars as well. I absolutely loved it. I'm very fortunate to have two colleagues at work that are also really into reading, and one of them said to me, "Oh, Sophie, have you read this book?" And she gave it to me and said I could borrow it. It's the first in a series called A Court of Thorns and Roses. I gather there's quite a big following behind it now, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be my thing. In the first couple of chapters I wasn't really sure, and then when you get the kind of the big turning moment right near the start of the first book when she goes off, I don't want to cause any spoilers, from that point I just absolutely fell in love with that book. It's just fantastic, and actually throughout the rest of this year I've now also read the second book. I took that to Mexico with us. I also took the third book to Mexico and got a good way through that, and then I've just finished the fourth one. I have got the fifth one to read but haven't started it yet. The whole series is just fantastic. It's not something I would have picked for myself as well, which was a nice surprise to have. I gave the first 3 books 5 stars and I gave the fourth one 4 stars, but to be fair, that was only a novella. It felt like a Christmas version of the book, to be honest. Next up we have our first 3-star rating of this year, and that was With This Kiss by Carrie Hope Fletcher. Obviously I enjoyed the other 2 books that I'd already read / listened to earlier in the year, and I bought this physical book because I thought it sounded quite interesting, but it just was not great. I kind of had to force my way through it, which sucked. I just felt like the idea was fantastic, but the plot just didn't feel that well executed to me. So 3 stars for that one, and it's now with charity for reselling. Around this time I got my library membership, so I borrowed a couple of books from my local library. The first one was Just My Luck by Adele Parks, and the second one is Written in the Stars by Ali Harris. They were both decent. I gave them both 4 stars. Just My Luck is about a couple who win the jackpot on the lottery, but their friends claim that they were in a syndicate and they say, no, you pulled out of the syndicate that night when you said it was stupid and stuff like that. So that was a very interesting one. And then Written in the Stars is a sliding doors type book, but it was quite interesting to see the 2 different sides. The next audiobook I listened to was called Unwind Your Mind by Emma Whispers Red. This is a book about ASMR and kind of what it is, the science behind it, and a bit about kind of Emma as an ASMR artist. I watch ASMR. I've been watching Emma for 7, 8 years, so it's been quite a while, and so this was quite interesting. I mean, I knew a lot of the kind of background anyway, just from being involved with ASMR for quite a while, and I gave it 4 stars. Next is a book that I think I already owned. It's a physical book called A Keeper by Graham Norton. Don't be put off by the fact that it's by Graham Norton, because I've read 2 or 3 of his books and they've been fantastic. Like, they kind of start off a bit slow and then all of a sudden they become amazing. A Keeper is about this lady whose mother passes away, and then as she's kind of clearing out the house, she starts to find out a lot more about her mum's younger life, I suppose, and it's fantastic. Would highly recommend. I gave that one 5 stars, and then I gave the next one 5 stars, which was another physical book called The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Just fantastic. It's about this family who run a funeral home and then the dad passes away, and it was just, I thought it was brilliant. Next up I think is my first psychological thriller, and it's I See You by Claire McIntosh. I gave it 4 stars and it was good. It was quite long. It was an audiobook, which I think was quite a good way of doing it. I just felt like it really suited the audiobook format. It's about a woman who sees her photo in the newspaper, and obviously there's questions about why and who put it there and all this sort of thing. So yeah, very interesting. My next audiobook was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which is a very popular book. And I'll be honest, I was shocked that this concept has never been done before, or something like this concept. It was just incredible, and I gave it 5 stars. Next up, we're getting into my holiday books. So the next one is an audiobook that I borrowed from the library, which was called One Last Secret by Adele Parks. It was a bit of a thriller, I'll be honest, and it did feel quite long and drawn out, and it took a long time for it all to come together at the end, so I gave it 4 stars. In terms of other holiday books, obviously I've mentioned the second and third books in A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I also borrowed A Promised Land by Barack Obama, just because that was immediately available through BorrowBox, the audiobook library thing, and I wasn't necessarily sure how I was going to get on with it. So it covers the first of Barack Obama's terms as president and kind of the lead up to the election and his start in politics and all that sort of thing. It was about 30 hours long. It was a very, very long audiobook. I would say typically I listen to audiobooks that are about 12 hours, so it was more than double. But it was really interesting, and I think I knew a little bit about American politics, and I remembered little kind of snippets of Barack Obama's time in office, especially this first term. And I just found it really interesting, and I felt so proud when I finally got it finished after 30 hours. Definitely not for the light-hearted. And I gave it 5 stars, which I'm quite surprised at looking back. Another audiobook that I gave 5 stars to was I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I'd seen a lot around this autobiography, and also Jeanette reads the audiobook, which I think gives it kind of another layer. And it's heartbreaking but fascinating to kind of hear about her childhood and her, you know, teen years in the spotlight, and then what happened after iCarly. I was never an iCarly fan, by the way, so I wouldn't necessarily have borrowed this had there not been all of this kind of conversation around it, but I gave it 5 stars and I thought it was brilliant. Also, while I was on holiday, I started a bit of a theme of borrowing Jacqueline Wilson audiobooks. So I was a big Jacqueline Wilson fan as kind of a child and a teenager, and they have a lot of her books on BorrowBox, including a lot that I was obviously too old to read, if that makes sense. So ones that came out after I was the right sort of age to be reading them. So I'm just going to fly through all of the Jacqueline Wilson audiobooks that I've listened to since then. I'm going to have to read them off the list because I'm not going to remember them all otherwise. So firstly, I listened to the Worry website, which I gave 4 stars to. I then listened to the Bed and Breakfast Star, which I gave 3 stars to. I then listened to Vicky Angel, which was 4 stars. Bad Girls, 4 stars. Cliffhanger, 4 stars, and then Buried Alive, which is the second one in that series, which is 4 stars as well. Double Act, 4 stars. Girls in Love, 3 stars. And then I couldn't get the second one, so I had to go on to the third one, which is Girls Out Late, which was 3 stars. And then the fourth one, Girls in Tears, which was 3 stars. And then I also listened to The Butterfly Club. I gave that one 3 stars. I never read that as a child, so that was a new story to me. And then the other new story to me was Video Rose, which I think was aimed at a slightly younger audience. I gave that 3 stars as well. I am currently listening to the second girls book, which is Girls Under Pressure. I'm about 75% of the way through, so I will also get that finished before the end of the year. The next audiobook was If I Never Met You by Vari McFarlane. This was a good book, I enjoyed it. It was a bit of a kind of we'll pretend to date and then we fall in love sort of book. It was quite predictable, but I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. Quite a few years ago, my sister's then boyfriend was getting rid of some books, which included Jamie Vardy's autobiography, which is From Nowhere, My Story. And I said to him, oh, I'd fancy reading that, can I have it? So I've had it sat on the bookshelf for 4 years? Over 4 years, and I finally got around to reading it. I felt like it was quite evident there was a ghostwriter involved. Some of the kind of less pleasant things that Jamie has done that he addresses are addressed in a very diplomatic way. I appreciate that I should never have done this and it's wrong to do that, which, you know. So I did find it very interesting. I gave it 4 stars. Next was a book that I saw in Aldi for like £2 or £3 and I just picked it up on a bit of a whim. It's called Tall Bones and it's by Anna Bailey. This is about a girl that goes missing and then obviously everybody's trying to figure out what happened and brings in all these people that she knew in her life. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I borrowed The Thursday Murder Club, the first book in the series by Richard Osman. I got that from the library as well. Really enjoyed it, thought it was fantastic, brilliant concept, funny in places, and I gave it 5 stars. I also recently finished the second one, which is The Man Who Died Twice. That one I again borrowed from the library on audiobook and I gave that one 5 stars as well, although I didn't think it was quite as good as the first book, so I would have given it 4.5 if that was an option. I've got the next one, which is The Bullet That Missed, I think is the third one. I've got that on reserve at the library, so I think the way that it works is they can only have a certain number of people borrowing an audiobook at a time, so I've kind of put in a request for it. It's not due until August next year, so we'll see. It might get a bit earlier if people start kind of listen to them quicker than the 3-week borrow time that you have. The fourth book, which only came out a couple of months ago, the waiting list is until 2027 through the library. So I'm going to wait for that to come down a little bit because I do not want to be waiting like 3 or 4 years. Next up is an audiobook that I listened to in one day and it's The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I didn't necessarily intend to listen to the whole thing in a day, it's just that I listened listen on like 1.75 speed, so I get through things quite quickly. And I also had it on in the background while I was playing on 2 Point Hospital, so I just managed to blitz my way through it. I have been a fan of Britney Spears since I was a child, like probably not quite 25 years, but probably not far off it. And it was very interesting to hear her perspective of everything that's kind of gone on in her life, and like her childhood and then early career, and then obviously the big career, and then post that with the conservatorship and everything that went on with that. Again, I think it was quite obvious that there was a ghostwriter at some times, although it didn't feel as stark as it did with Jamie Vardy's autobiography, so credit to whoever the ghostwriter was, because they made it seem a lot more like it was actually Britney. I found it very interesting and I gave it 4 stars. And then I went on a bit of a bad luck streak, so I read Her Husband's Mistake by Sheila O'Flanagan. The husband's mistake is that the wife catches him having sex with the next door neighbour, and it's about everything that kind of comes from that. I have said to a lot of people that I think I misread the blurb. I thought the book was going to be something else, so that's kind of my own fault. It was basically about how this woman gets over her husband cheating on her and whether or not she decides to go back to him and kind of finding her independence and stuff like that. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay, it was a bit of a slog at times, but like I said, it was my own fault for misreading the blurb. And that was a physical book, as was the next one, which is Never Never by Taryn Fisher and Colleen Hoover. This is about 2 teenagers who lose their memories, basically, and they're trying to figure out who they are, what's happening, and all that sort of thing. Sounds like a great concept, but it felt very slow at the start, and then it did start to pick up and get a bit better towards the end. I have seen a lot of commentary about the ending and like, what on earth does that mean? And like, I'm still no clearer on what's happened. And I completely understand that, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do understand where people are coming from in that respect. I gave that one 3 stars as well. And then I suppose the other thing I have to mention is that I borrowed an audiobook and I officially put it as did not finish yesterday. I got 20% of the way through it, and that was I Owe You One by Sophie Kinsella. I got 20% of the way through it and I just wasn't enjoying it. And I find that when I've got an audiobook that I really love, I listen to it at every opportunity I can get. So if I'm doing the cleaning, or, you know, emptying the dishwasher, or just any silly little things like that, then I will put it in. And I just found with this one, I was obviously 20% in and I was just not excited about it at all. So I just thought, do you know what, I don't have to do this to myself, I'm just gonna shelve it as did not finish. And that's the first and only one that I've got on there for this year. In terms of the books that I'm reading / listening to at the moment, I'm actually reading another Sophie Kinsella book, which is The Undomestic Goddess, about a woman who loses her job and then starts cleaning, I think. I'm right at the start of that, so I can't really give you any indication of what it's going to be like, but that's another book that I had on my bookshelf that I just hadn't got around to reading. I'm sure that I bought that from a charity shop, like probably not quite 10 years ago, but quite a long time ago. So I just really wanted to get that one kind of through and read. And then, as I said, I'm also listening to Girls Under Pressure through the library. And then I have also just started listening to another book this morning, which I will have to check the name of. The Boy, the Bird and the Coffin Maker by Matilda Woods. I think it's a children's book, but that's okay. I like kind of easy read, easy listening stuff, and I think it's only like 4 hours long, so it is definitely a much shorter book. I am 3% of the way through that apparently, so again, I can't really pass any opinion on it so far. But that's all of the books that I've read this year. My original target was 12 books, so 1 a month for the whole year technically. And I smashed that quite early on, so I then thought, well, if I'm listening to 1 audiobook and reading 1 physical book a month, then 24 seems reasonable. Beat that, and basically I've continued upping my target until at the moment it's 45 books. I think I am gonna make that, to be honest. I don't think I'm gonna get to 50, but I should exceed 45, which is pretty amazing considering that in January, February, March, April, I was just listening to audiobooks and was not really making any effort to read. So let me know if you've read any of these books and whether you agree with my star ratings. Also, if you think that based on what I've said, there's a particular book that I would really enjoy, then please do leave it in the comments, because I'm always trying to collect in new books that I want to read. I've got quite a few like end of year videos coming, so I'm going to do a review of all the shows that I've seen this year, and I'm going to talk about all the fun things that I did this year, as I call it, and also looking forward to 2024 and the fun things that I've got planned for next year. None of those videos will be up yet, so I will let the algorithm recommend you a video here, and don't forget to hit my face to subscribe if you are interested to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!